In the darkest corners of the galaxy, where even the most advanced alien civilizations have given up hope, there exists a truth that will shake the foundations of interstellar medicine forever. The Zephyrian Empire, masters of biotechnology for millennia, watched helplessly as their apex predator, the mighty Corvathian death cat, a creature that could tear through starship hulls with its claws, withered away from microscopic invaders no larger than a grain of sand. 12 different alien species had tried. The greatest medical minds across 17 star systems had failed. Even the ancient, ethereal collective, beings of pure energy who had transcended physical form eons ago, declared the parasitic plague unstoppable. But they had never encountered Dr. Sarah Chun, a human field medic who carried nothing more than a basic medkit, an unshakable determination, and something the galaxy had never seen before: the stubborn refusal of humanity to accept that anything was truly impossible. What happened next would not only save a dying beast, but rewrite everything the galaxy thought it knew about the power of human ingenuity, compassion, and the terrifying beauty of a species that simply would not quit. This is the story of how one human changed the fate of an entire world, armed with nothing but knowledge, courage, and the most dangerous weapon in the universe: hope. The transport ship Meridian's Edge shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, its hull groaning under the stress of the emergency jump. Dr. Sarah Chun gripped the medical bay's support rail, her knuckles white as the artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. Through the porthole, she could see their destination, Corvith Prime, a world shrouded in the amber glow of its dying star. "Doc, we're getting priority signals from the surface," called Lieutenant Morrison from the cockpit. They're begging us to hurry." Sarah had seen the initial reports 3 days ago, transmitted across half the galaxy by the Zephyrian Empire's most advanced communication arrays. The images were disturbing. Massive feline creatures, each the size of a small building, lying motionless in crystalline medical chambers. Their fur, once a brilliant silver blue that could reflect starlight, had dulled to an ashen gray. Worse still, their eyes, those legendary amber orbs that had struck fear into the hearts of pirates and invaders for centuries, were clouded and lifeless. The Corvathian death cats were dying, and, with them, the last line of defense for an entire civilization. Sarah Chun wasn't supposed to be here. She was a field medic assigned to the human colonial fleet's 47th Medical Corps, someone who patched up wounded soldiers and treated mining accidents on backwater planets. She wasn't a xenobiologist or an exotic disease specialist. But when the call came through Terran Command, a desperate plea from the Zephyrian Empire for any human medical expertise, she had volunteered immediately. Her colleagues thought she was insane. The Zephyrians were one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, their biotechnology surpassing human medicine by millennia. If they couldn't save their guardian beasts, what could one human medic possibly accomplish? But Sarah remembered her grandfather's stories about the old veterinarians back on Earth, the ones who would travel for days through harsh wilderness to save a single animal. "Sometimes," he used to say, "it's not about having the best equipment or the most knowledge. Sometimes it's about caring enough to try when everyone else has given up." The ship's landing thrusters fired, and Sarah felt her stomach lurch as they descended through Corvith Prime's thick atmosphere. Through the viewports, she could see sprawling cities of living crystal that grew from the planet's surface like magnificent coral reefs. But something was wrong. The crystals, which should have been pulsing with bioluminescent light, appeared dim and flickering. "The Corvathians aren't just pets or guard animals," Morrison called back to her, reading from his briefing datapad. "They're symbiotic. The entire ecosystem of this planet depends on their presence. When they die, everything dies." Sarah nodded grimly. She had studied the reports during their 3-day journey. The Corvathian death cats weren't just apex predators. They were keystone species whose very existence maintained the delicate balance of their world's biosphere. Their saliva contained enzymes that nourished the crystal forests. Their breath released spores that fertilized the atmospheric algae that produced oxygen. Even their waste products were essential nutrients for the soil-dwelling organisms that formed the foundation of the planet's food web. But now a microscopic parasite, something so small it had taken the Zephyrians' most powerful electron microscopes to detect, was killing them from within. The parasites attacked the cat's nervous systems, slowly shutting down their motor functions and, eventually, their vital organs. 12 different species of alien medics had tried to find a cure. All had failed. The ship touched down with a gentle bump, and Sarah gathered her equipment. Her medical kit was laughably primitive compared to Zephyrian technology, basic diagnostic tools, a few synthetic medicines, and some Earth-developed antibiotics that most galactic civilizations considered quaint. But she also carried something else, a comprehensive database of every veterinary procedure ever developed on Earth, from ancient traditional remedies to cutting-edge xenobiology research. The airlock hissed open, and Sarah stepped onto an alien world for the first time in her life. The atmosphere was thick and humid, filled with the scent of exotic pollens, and something else, something that reminded her of the animal hospital she had volunteered at as a child. The smell of sickness and fear. Waiting for her was High Healer Alexandra, a tall, graceful being whose crystalline skin reflected the amber light of the dying star above. Her species, the Zephyrians, were among the galaxy's most accomplished biotechnologists, capable of growing entire cities from specially modified organisms and creating medicines that could cure diseases at the genetic level. Dr. Chun, the Alexandra said, her voice carrying the melodic harmonics typical of her species. Thank you for coming, though I fear your journey may have been in vain. We have exhausted every treatment, every possibility. The Corvathians continue to die, and with them, our world. Sarah looked past the High Healer toward the massive biomedical facility that rose from the crystal forest like a living mountain. Through its translucent walls, she could see the shadowy forms of the dying death cats, each one a giant that had once been capable of hunting prey across continents. "I'd like to see them," Sarah said simply. "And I'd like to review all your treatment data." Alexandra's expression, visible through the subtle color changes in her crystalline features, suggested polite skepticism. "Of course, though I must warn you that even our most advanced healers have been unable to comprehend the nature of this plague. The parasites seem to adapt to every treatment we devise. It is as if they possess an intelligence of their own." As they walked through the biomedical facility, Sarah marveled at the sophistication of Zephyrian medicine. Healing chambers that could repair tissue damage at the cellular level. Diagnostic scanners that could map the neurological activity of an entire organism in real time. Medicine synthesizers that could create perfect molecular cures for any known pathogen. But despite all this technology, the Corvathians were still dying. They entered the main treatment chamber, a vast crystalline dome that housed dozens of the massive cats. Each creature lay in its own biopod, surrounded by monitoring equipment and life support systems. Sarah approached the nearest pod and gasped. The death cat was enormous, easily 15 meters from nose to tail, with muscles that bulged beneath its dulled fur. Even in its weakened state, it was a magnificent creature, built for power and grace. But its breathing was labored, and its once bright amber eyes were clouded with pain. "This is Thrakmor," Alexandra said softly. "He was our greatest hunter, capable of tracking prey across dimensional barriers. Now," she gestured helplessly at the monitoring displays that showed the creature's vital signs slowly declining. Sarah studied the readouts, noting the irregular neural patterns and the way the creature's immune system seemed to be attacking its own tissues. "Tell me about the parasites," she said, pulling out her own primitive-looking diagnostic scanner. "They are unlike anything in our databases," Alexandra replied. "Microscopic, highly adaptive, and seemingly immune to all forms of treatment. They target the nervous system specifically, multiplying in the cerebrospinal fluid and spreading throughout the host's body. We have tried antiparasitic medications, immune system boosters, even direct neural intervention. Nothing works. Sarah ran her scanner over Thrackmore's massive form, frowning at the readings. Her equipment was basic compared to the Zephyrian technology, but sometimes simplicity had advantages. Where the alien scanners showed overwhelming detail, her device provided a cleaner, more focused picture. "These parasites," she said slowly, "show me the microscopic imagery." ZYXandra activated a holographic display that showed the creatures in horrifying detail. They were tiny, almost crystalline in structure, with multiple flagella that allowed them to move rapidly through bodily fluids. But something about their movement pattern struck Sarah as familiar. "They're not random," she murmured, studying the way the parasites moved. "Look at this, they're following chemical gradients, seeking out specific neurotransmitters. Yes, we observe this behavior. They seem to prefer areas of high neural activity, which is why they're so destructive to the nervous system." Sarah nodded, but her mind was racing. During her veterinary training on Earth, she had encountered something similar, a parasitic infection in Earth's big cats that followed almost identical patterns. The treatment had been counterintuitive, requiring not the latest high-tech medicine, but an old, almost forgotten approach. "I need to see your complete treatment history," she said. "Every medicine you've tried, every procedure you've attempted." For the next several hours, Sarah pored over the Zephyrian medical records, using her portable data translator to convert their advanced biotechnical reports into something she could understand. The aliens had tried everything imaginable: direct chemical attacks on the parasites, immune system modifications, even experimental quantum-level interventions. But as she studied the data, Sarah began to notice something troubling. Every treatment the Zephyrians had attempted was based on the same fundamental principle: overwhelming the parasites with superior technology. They had tried to outsmart the infection with increasingly complex solutions. What they hadn't tried was working with the host's own biology. "ZYXandra," Sarah said, looking up from her data screens. "Have you attempted any treatments that focus on strengthening the cat's natural immune responses rather than directly attacking the parasites?" The high healer's crystalline features shifted in what Sarah interpreted as confusion. "The immune system is already compromised by the infection. Our scans show massive inflammatory responses that are actually contributing to the neural damage." "Exactly," Sarah said, a spark of excitement growing in her chest. "You've been treating the symptoms, not the cause. The inflammation isn't a sign of immune failure. It's a sign that the cat's immune systems are fighting back, but they're fighting the wrong battle." She turned back to Thrackmore's biopod and studied the creature's massive form. In the complex readouts and sophisticated monitoring equipment, everyone had missed something fundamental. The Corvathians weren't dying because their immune systems were weak. They were dying because their immune systems were too strong, attacking their own nervous tissue in an attempt to eliminate the parasites. "I think," Sarah said slowly, her mind already working through the implications, "I know what's killing them. And if I'm right, the cure isn't in your medicine synthesizers. It's something much simpler." ZYXandra moved closer, her crystalline skin brightening with hope. "What do you mean?" Sarah looked around the vast medical facility with its incredible technology and advanced biotechnological marvels. Then she opened her simple medical kit and pulled out a small vial of clear liquid, a basic anti-inflammatory compound that any Earth veterinarian would recognize. "Sometimes," she said, echoing her grandfather's words, "the best solution isn't the most advanced one. Sometimes it's about understanding what the patient really needs." As if sensing her presence, Thrackmore's massive head turned slightly, and for just a moment his clouded amber eyes seemed to focus on her. In that instant, Sarah felt the weight of an entire world's hope settling on her shoulders. Somewhere in this vast medical facility, surrounded by technology beyond her comprehension, she would have to find a way to save not just one dying creature, but an entire ecosystem that depended on these magnificent beasts for survival. The clock was ticking, and every second that passed brought the Corvathians and their world closer to extinction. The next morning brought grim news. 2 more Corvathians had died during the night, their massive forms finally succumbing to the relentless assault of the microscopic parasites. Sarah stood in the memorial grove where the Zephyrians had placed the bodies, watching as the crystal trees that had once drawn life from the cat's presence began to dim and wither. "We have perhaps 72 hours before the cascade failure becomes irreversible," Alexandra said, her voice heavy with grief. "When the crystal forests begin to die, they release toxins into the atmosphere. The algae colonies will follow. Then, the oxygen production will cease entirely." Sarah nodded grimly. She had spent the entire night reviewing every piece of data she could access, comparing Zephyrian medical records with Earth veterinary databases. Her theory about autoimmune response was solidifying, but proving it would require testing that the dying Corvathians might not survive. "I need to run some experiments," she said. "But first, I want to try something with one of the less critical patients." Alexandra led her back to the medical facility, where they found Dr. Kethvar, the facility's chief medical officer, hunched over a quantum-level scanner that was mapping the neural pathways of a young Corvathian named Sylphera. The creature was smaller than Thrakmor, but still massive by human standards, her silver-blue fur marked with the distinctive stripes that indicated royal bloodline. "Any change?" Alexandra asked. Kethvar's tentacled head shook negatively. "The parasitic load is increasing exponentially. I estimate she is perhaps 18 hours before complete neural shutdown." He gestured at the holographic display showing Sylphera's brain activity. "You can see here how the parasites have formed colonies along the major neural pathways. Our most aggressive treatments have only made them multiply faster." Sarah studied the display, noting how the parasitic colonies seemed to cluster around areas of high electrical activity. "Dr. Kethvar, have you tried reducing the neural stimulation instead of increasing the immune response?" The Zephyrian physician looked at her with what she interpreted as polite confusion. "Reducing stimulation would compromise the host's consciousness and motor functions. We cannot save the patient by rendering them comatose." "But what if consciousness is what the parasites are feeding on?" Sarah asked. "Look at this distribution pattern. They're not randomly distributed. They're specifically targeting areas of high neural activity. What if they're actually feeding on the electrical impulses generated by conscious thought?" Kethvar exchanged a look with Alexandra. "That would be unprecedented. No known parasite feeds directly on neural energy." "No known parasite in your databases," Sarah corrected gently. "But Earth has examples of organisms that feed on electrical fields, certain bacteria, some deep-sea creatures. If these parasites evolved in an environment rich with bioelectric activity, they might have developed the ability to consume neural energy directly." She pulled out her tablet and called up a file from her veterinary database. "On Earth, we've encountered similar cases with great cats, tigers, and lions suffering from a parasitic infection that caused progressive neurological deterioration. The standard treatment failed repeatedly until someone tried a completely different approach." "What approach?" Alexandra asked, her crystalline features brightening with interest. "Induced hibernation," Sarah said. "By reducing the host's metabolic rate and neural activity to minimal levels, the parasites were essentially starved of their food source. Meanwhile, the host's immune system could focus on clearing the infection without the overwhelming stimulus of constant neural activity." Kethvar's tentacles writhed in what Sarah had learned was a sign of deep thought. "The Corvathians do not naturally hibernate. Their biology is not designed for extended periods of reduced metabolism. But they could be induced into therapeutic comas," Sarah pointed out. "You have the technology to maintain their life functions while suppressing neural activity. The question is whether you're willing to try an approach that hasn't been tested on Corvathian physiology." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Sarah could see the conflict in the aliens' faces, the desperate hope warring with scientific caution. These were beings whose medical knowledge far exceeded her own, yet they were being asked to trust the intuition of a primitive human medic. "There are risks," Alexandra said finally. "If you're wrong about the parasite's feeding behavior, reducing neural activity could accelerate the infection. We could lose Sylphera in hours instead of days. But If I'm right, Sarah countered, we might save not just her, but all of them. The decision was agonizing. Sarah could see the weight of responsibility crushing down on the alien healers as they contemplated gambling with the life of a royal bloodline Corvathian. But time was running out, and conventional treatments had already proven useless. We'll need to start with the smallest possible intervention, Kethvar said finally. A mild sedative that reduces neural activity without inducing full coma. If the parasitic response is positive, we can increase the dosage gradually. Agreed, Sarah said. But I want to monitor the entire process with both your scanners and mine. Sometimes different technologies can reveal different aspects of the same phenomenon. The preparation took several hours. Zhuaixindra had to obtain permission from the Planetary Council, while Kethvar calibrated the biosupport systems that would maintain Silphera's life functions during the procedure. Sarah spent the time reviewing every piece of data she could find about Corvathian metabolism and neural structure, looking for any detail that might make the difference between success and catastrophe. Finally, as Corvath Prime's dying star reached its zenith, they were ready to begin. Silphera lay motionless in her biopod, her massive form surrounded by monitoring equipment that tracked everything from her brain waves to the electrical conductivity of her cerebrospinal fluid. Sarah positioned her simple diagnostic scanner alongside the sophisticated Zephyrian instruments, knowing that her primitive technology might catch something their advanced systems missed. Beginning sedative administration, Kethvar announced. Neural activity should begin declining in approximately 3 minutes. Sarah watched her scanner's display as the first traces of sedative entered Silphera's bloodstream. Almost immediately, she could see changes in the creature's electrical field, subtle shifts that her equipment detected as variations in bioelectric potential. Neural activity dropping to 80% of baseline, Kethvar reported. Parasitic colonies appear stable. No, wait. I'm detecting slight movement in the temporal lobe clusters. On Sarah's scanner, the changes were more dramatic. Her equipment, designed to detect broad electrical patterns rather than specific cellular activity, showed a clear shift in the parasite's behavior. They were becoming more active, moving toward areas of remaining neural activity like moths drawn to flame. Increase the dosage, she said urgently. They're responding to the reduced activity by concentrating in the areas that are still active. We need to reduce neural function across the board. But if we go too deep, Kethvar began. Trust me, Sarah interrupted. This is exactly what we saw with the Earth cats. The parasites will exhaust themselves trying to find enough neural activity to sustain their colonies. For the next hour, they carefully titrated Silphera's sedation level, watching as her neural activity dropped to levels that would have been considered dangerous under normal circumstances. The massive cat's breathing slowed to barely perceptible levels, her heartbeat dropping to a rhythm that seemed almost death-like. But on the scanners, something remarkable was happening. Parasitic activity is decreasing, Kethvar reported, his voice filled with wonder. Colonies in the frontal cortex are beginning to disperse. I'm seeing cellular breakdown in several major clusters. Sarah's scanner confirmed the observation with even more dramatic results. The electrical disturbances that had marked the parasite's presence were fading rapidly. More importantly, she could see signs that Silphera's immune system was finally beginning to mount an effective defense against the weakened invaders. White cell activity is increasing in areas where parasitic concentration is dropping, she announced. Her immune system is cleaning up the debris. 6 hours later, Silphera's neural scans showed the first clear improvement any Corvathian had experienced since the plague began. The parasitic colonies that had been growing exponentially were now in retreat, and the cat's own immune responses were finally gaining ground against the infection. It's working, Zhuaixindra whispered, her crystalline skin brightening with an inner light that Sarah had never seen before. By the eternal crystal, it's actually working. But their celebration was premature. As they prepared to begin bringing Silphera out of sedation, alarms began blaring throughout the medical facility. Through the biodome's transparent walls, Sarah could see Zephyrian emergency vehicles racing toward the distant crystal forests. "What's happening?" she asked. Kethvar was already accessing the facility's communication systems, his tentacles dancing over holographic control interfaces. "Emergency report from the forest monitoring stations," he said, his voice tight with new concern. "3 of the primary crystal groves have gone completely dark. The ecosystem cascade is accelerating." Through the dome's walls, Sarah could see the effects with her own eyes. Vast sections of the crystal forest that had been glowing with bioluminescent life just hours ago were now dark and lifeless. The death of the remaining Korvathians was accelerating the collapse of the entire planetary ecosystem. "How long do we have?" Sarah asked. "At this rate of progression," Alexandra replied, checking her own instruments, "perhaps 48 hours before atmospheric oxygen drops below sustainable levels for most life forms." Sarah looked down at Silphira, whose vital signs showed continued improvement even as the world outside began to die. They had found a treatment that worked, but implementing it on the scale needed to save the remaining Korvathians would require resources and time they might not have. "We need to wake her up enough to confirm the treatment worked," she said. "Then, we need to begin emergency procedures on every remaining cat simultaneously." Simultaneous induced comas for 37 Korvathians? Kethvar's tentacles writhed in distress. "The life support requirements alone would drain our facility's power reserves. And if something goes wrong with the procedure, if we don't try, they all die anyway," Sarah pointed out, "along with everything else on this planet." As they began the delicate process of bringing Silphira back to consciousness, Sarah's mind raced through the logistical challenges ahead. They would need to modify the facility's life support systems to handle dozens of critically sedated Korvathians simultaneously. They would need to train the Zephyrian medical staff in the specific protocols required for the induced hibernation therapy. Most critically, they would need to do all of this while the planet's ecosystem collapsed around them. But when Silphira's amber eyes finally opened, clear and bright for the first time in weeks, Sarah knew they had no choice but to try. The young Korvathian's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. Her neural patterns had returned to normal, and blood tests showed no trace of the parasitic infection. "She's completely clear," Kethvar announced, his voice filled with amazement. "No parasites, no neural damage, no immune system dysfunction. It's as if the infection never existed." Sarah nodded, but her attention was already focused on the larger challenge ahead. Saving one Korvathian had taken 6 hours and the full attention of 3 medical specialists. Saving 37 would require perfect coordination and resources stretched far beyond their normal limits. Outside the medical facility, the crystal forest continued to dim and die, and Corvith Prime's atmosphere slowly began its transformation from life-sustaining to toxic. Time was running out, and the margin for error was shrinking with every passing hour. But they had proven the treatment worked. Now they just had to find a way to implement it on a scale that could save an entire world. The emergency council session convened in the heart of the crystalline city, where the planet's greatest minds gathered beneath a dome that should have sparkled with reflected starlight, but now flickered weakly as the crystal forests continued their inexorable death spiral. Sarah found herself standing before beings whose civilizations span millennia, their collective knowledge vast beyond human comprehension. Yet all eyes were focused on her simple medical kit and the impossible task she proposed. 37 simultaneous hibernation procedures, Supreme Healer Morthek intoned, his massive form towering over the assembly like a living mountain of crystalline flesh. The power requirements alone would exceed our facility's capacity by 300%. Sarah had expected this challenge. During her sleepless night of calculations, she had run the numbers repeatedly, always arriving at the same conclusion. The standard Zephyrian life support systems were designed for individual patient care, not mass emergency treatment. But she had also discovered something in their technical specifications that might provide a solution. "What if we don't use the individual biopods?" she suggested, pulling up a holographic display of the facility's power grid. Your main treatment chamber has atmospheric controls that can maintain environmental conditions for the entire space. If we modify the sedation delivery to work through the atmosphere itself, we could treat all the Corvathians simultaneously while using a fraction of the power. The silence that followed was profound. Dr. Kethvar's tentacles stopped their constant motion, and even High Healer Vexandra's crystalline features remained perfectly still as they contemplated what Sarah was suggesting. Atmospheric sedation has never been attempted on this scale, Morthek said finally. The dosage calculations would be enormously complex, accounting for each individual's body mass, metabolic rate, and infection severity. One miscalculation could kill them all. The alternative is certain death, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was proposing. The ecosystem collapse has accelerated. We have perhaps 36 hours before atmospheric toxicity reaches critical levels. There's no time for individual treatments. She gestured to the display, showing the crystal forest's rapid deterioration. Every hour we delay, we lose more of the symbiotic organisms that the Corvathians' recovery depends on. Even if we cure the cats, if their ecosystem is gone, they won't survive long enough to rebuild it. Zewixindra stepped forward. Her internal light pulsing with what Sarah had learned was a sign of intense concentration. There is precedent for atmospheric medical treatment, she said slowly. During the Great Plague of the Third Epoch, my ancestors used similar techniques to treat entire populations. But that was with our own species, beings we understood completely. The principles should be the same, Sarah insisted. We know the treatment works. Silphera proved that. The parasites respond predictably to neural suppression. We just need to scale up the delivery method. Supreme Healer Morthek moved closer to the display, his massive form casting strange shadows in the flickering light. Even if we succeed in the initial sedation, maintaining 37 Corvathians in therapeutic hibernation would require constant monitoring. Our medical staff has never managed more than 5 simultaneous critical patients. Then, we'll have to learn quickly, Sarah said, and we'll need help. She turned to address the full council. I know this seems impossible. Your medical technology is far beyond anything we have on Earth. But sometimes the most advanced solution isn't the right one. Sometimes you need to step back and use simpler approaches. She opened her medical kit and pulled out a small device that looked primitive compared to the sophisticated Zephyrian equipment surrounding them. This is a basic atmospheric monitor designed for Earth emergency medicine. It can track environmental factors that your specialized equipment might overlook. If we combine your advanced life support technology with some basic environmental medicine principles, we might just make this work. The debate that followed was intense and technical, with various healers raising objections about drug interactions, atmospheric pressure dynamics, and the complex metabolic variations between individual Corvathians. But as reports continued to arrive about the accelerating ecosystem collapse, the urgency of the situation became impossible to ignore. We will attempt it, Morthek decided finally, but we will need to begin immediately. Every moment of delay reduces our chances of success. The next 12 hours were a blur of frantic preparation. The main treatment chamber was reconfigured to accommodate all 37 remaining Corvathians, their massive forms arranged in carefully calculated positions to ensure optimal atmospheric circulation. Sarah worked alongside teams of Zephyrian technicians to modify their environmental control systems, adapting them to deliver the precise combination of sedatives and life support gases that the hibernation procedure required. The most challenging aspect was the dosage calculations. Each Corvathian required a slightly different concentration of sedative based on their body mass, infection severity, and individual metabolic rate. Sarah found herself working with mathematical models that stretched her understanding to its limits, relying on the Zephyrians' computational systems while contributing Earth medical protocols that their databases had never encountered. The atmospheric mixture is ready, announced Chief Technician Vorthal, her multiple arms dancing across control interfaces that managed environmental systems of staggering complexity. Sedative concentrations set to optimal levels for the average body mass, with variance compensators for individual differences. Sarah checked her own atmospheric monitor, noting the precise chemical composition that would soon fill the chamber where the Corvathians lay waiting. It was a strange mixture, advanced Zephyrian pharmaceuticals combined with basic atmospheric medicine principles developed in Earth's emergency rooms. Life support systems are operating at maximum capacity, Kethvar reported from his monitoring station. We're drawing power from 3 backup generators, but we should be able to maintain these levels for the duration of the treatment. Through the chamber's observation windows, Sarah could see the Corvathians arranged in their carefully planned positions. Thrackmore, the great hunter whose declining condition had first shown her the severity of the plague, lay near the center of the formation. Around him were arranged the other survivors, warriors, scouts, and breeders whose loss would mean the extinction of their species. Beginning atmospheric sedation, Vorthal announced. All personnel should clear the treatment area immediately. The chamber sealed with a soft hiss, and Sarah watched through the reinforced windows as the modified atmosphere began to circulate. At first, there was no visible change in the massive cats. They continued their labored breathing, their clouded amber eyes staring sightlessly at nothing. Then, gradually, their breathing began to slow. Neural activity dropping across all subjects, Kethvar reported, monitoring the collective brainwave patterns of 37 dying giants. Sedation appears to be taking effect uniformly. Sarah's atmospheric monitor showed the precise chemical balance she had calculated, but, more importantly, it showed something the Zephyrian equipment wasn't designed to detect: subtle changes in the bioelectric field generated by the mass Corvathians. As their neural activity declined, the electrical disturbances that marked the parasite's presence began to shift and weaken. "It's working," she whispered, watching the readouts that showed parasitic activity beginning to decline across multiple subjects simultaneously. "They're going into hibernation, and the parasites are starving." But maintaining 37 massive creatures in therapeutic hibernation proved even more challenging than inducing the state. Every few hours, one of the Corvathians would show signs of distress: breathing irregularities, cardiac arrhythmias, or dangerous drops in core body temperature. Sarah and the Zephyrian medical team worked in constant rotation, making minute adjustments to the atmospheric mixture and life support systems to maintain the delicate balance between deep sedation and life-threatening suppression of vital functions. 18 hours into the procedure, they faced their first major crisis. Korthon, one of the older male Corvathians, began showing signs of cardiac failure as his ancient heart struggled to maintain circulation under the deep sedation. "His heart rate is dropping below sustainable levels," Kethvar announced urgently. "If we don't intervene, he'll go into cardiac arrest within minutes." Sarah studied the monitoring displays, noting how Korthon's larger body mass and slower metabolism were causing him to absorb sedatives more quickly than the others. "Reduce the atmospheric concentration in his section," she ordered, "and increase the oxygen mixture to support cardiac function. But that will create atmospheric gradients throughout the chamber," Vorthal protested. "The other subjects could be affected. Then we'll have to manage individual zones," Sarah replied. "Divide the chamber into sections with slightly different atmospheric compositions for each group of cats." It was an enormously complex modification, requiring real-time adjustments to atmospheric controls that had never been designed for such precision. But the Zephyrian technicians rose to the challenge, their advanced environmental systems proving capable of maintaining dozens of distinct atmospheric zones within the same chamber. Hour by hour, the parasitic loads in the Corvathian systems continued to decline. Sarah's monitoring equipment showed the electrical disturbances fading as the microscopic invaders found themselves unable to sustain their colonies in the absence of sufficient neural activity. Meanwhile, the cat's immune systems, no longer overwhelmed by the parasite's rapid reproduction, began the slow process of clearing the infection. But outside the medical facility, the situation continued to deteriorate. Reports from the Crystal Forest showed entire sectors going dark as the symbiotic organisms that depended on the Corvathians' presence continued to die. Atmospheric oxygen levels were dropping measurably, and toxic compounds released by the dying crystal formations were beginning to contaminate the air. "We're running out of time," Alexander warned during one of Sarah's brief rest breaks. "Even if we successfully cure all the Korvathians, if we wait too long to wake them, there may not be enough of an ecosystem left for them to restore." Sarah looked through the observation windows at the 37 sleeping giants, their massive forms barely moving as the life support systems maintained their artificial hibernation. The parasitic infections were clearing rapidly, faster than anyone had dared hope, but the healing process couldn't be rushed without risking a relapse. "How long do we have before atmospheric conditions become irreversible?" she asked. "Perhaps 12 hours, Alexander replied. "After that, even if we restore the Korvathians to perfect health, the damage to the ecosystem will be too extensive for them to repair." Sarah nodded grimly. They were caught in a terrible race between the cat's recovery and the planet's death. If they brought the Korvathians out of hibernation too early, the parasites might resurge and the treatment would fail. If they waited too long, there would be nothing left to save. "We'll start with the healthiest specimens," she decided. "Bring them out of hibernation in stages and hope their presence can slow the ecosystem collapse while the others complete their recovery." It was another gamble, but then everything about this mission had been a gamble from the beginning. As Sarah prepared for the delicate process of selective awakening, she couldn't help but remember her grandfather's words about the old veterinarians who would travel for days to save a single animal. Now, she was trying to save not just 37 animals, but an entire world that depended on them for survival. And she was running out of time.